For 6 minutes, Eric Melillo. Please go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Chief Mark. Now, does your community have adequate access to PPE? Yes. For PPE, if I speak for my specific community, I can't speak for all communities, but ours, we had difficulty getting PPE for COVID, and we had to turn to the allocated COVID budgets.
I hope I'm coming through clearly. I think I have a bit of a delay.
Coming through fine. Go ahead.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions for Dr. Martin as well. Doctor, I see that one of your research subjects is food justice, and I believe you also mentioned food security in your remarks. I'm wondering if you can provide some insight for committee members onto how the current pandemic has really impacted food security and for Indigenous peoples, for Indigenous communities, and of course, across the North.
Thank you. Yes, so food security, for those of you that are unfamiliar with it, I guess is the idea that people have the ability to access safe, culturally appropriate, and the right amounts of food that provide for their nutritional needs. And in many cases, also food justice also involves the idea that Indigenous people specifically are able to access lands and their territories in ways that allow them to enact culturally appropriate activities. And so what we've seen during the pandemic is that many Indigenous communities, in some cases, are in fact getting out on the land even more frequently as a result of having more time to be able to do that. But with respect to that, there's also more safety concerns. So when we have more people going out on the land and enacting their cultural activities, there's also a lot of risk that's involved with that. So when we have things like climate change in the north, for example, and late freeze-ups and early breaks-ups of ice, it presents a lot of danger for people to be able to access the land in the ways that they've always done so. So it's sort of an interesting, I guess, interpretation of what food security looks like. But I think that we need to think about safety. But in terms of also ensuring that people have access to enough food, that is also a concern. We know that many communities, in fact, have had difficulties accessing food because of transportation issues. So some of the logistics around that have been troublesome. I also spoke to a colleague of mine who works with the Nunatsiavut government in Labrador, who indicated that they don't have lights on the runways in many of their smaller communities, which means that when the weather is good, flights need to get in and out. So that's for emergencies, but also for supplies, for food, for health supplies, and so on. If those runways don't have adequate lighting, then if the weather is good in the evening, they simply can't get in or out of those communities, which poses a threat for not just safety, but also for accessing supplies as needed. So I think there's multiple layers and multiple ways in which food security is affected.
Absolutely. I think that might answer part of my next question I wanted to ask, but I'll put it out anyways. And it's a little more specific to some of the government programming that has been in place to help address food security. And particularly, I'm interested in your thoughts on Nutrition North. I'm sure it's something you're fairly familiar with through your work. And I think when I talk to people, whether it's in my riding in Kenora or across the North, it seems that this program, frankly, hasn't done enough. We've seen increases in food insecurity, and we've seen a lot of these challenges persist. So I'm curious if you have any specific thoughts to that program, how it might be able to be improved going forward.
Yeah, I spent a little bit of time looking at the issue of the Nutrition North program, and indeed, I think you're bang on. What you've heard is sort of consistent with what I've heard in terms of the research that we've done in that looking at that program, whereby a lot of the subsidies that are provided to the program aren't necessarily reaching the pockets of the consumers as they purchase foods from stores in northern communities. And so I'm not sure that I have the right or the single only solution to solving that problem, but I think that when you talk to a lot of the Indigenous communities in those regions that are relying on the Nutrition North program, I think they often have, I guess, a lot of their own ideas about how to do that. So I'm not sure that I have anything specific to add to that right now, but I think that they would. We also know that a lot of the grocers aren't necessarily able to offer the subsidy directly to their own customers. So whether there's a way to ensure that or mandate that the subsidies that are directed to the grocers, the owners of the grocery stores, can be ensured to be passed on to the customer. I think that's the biggest gap that I've noticed.
Thanks very much, and we'll move on now.